Hello, I'm Michael Cantrell, and you are listening to the Prison Officer Podcast, a place to have a conversation about the forgotten cops that work in this country's jails, prisons, and correctional centers. A place for me to try to make sense of a career spent working inside the fence with some of the greatest people that nobody sees or recognizes for the important job they do to keep this world safe. If you love this podcast, hit the follow button, or better yet, share with your family, friends, or coworkers. In more than 28 years of corrections, I have used or supervised Pepperball hundreds of times. Now, as a master instructor for Pepperball, I teach others about the versatility and effectiveness of this Pepperball system. From cell extractions to disturbances on the rec yard, Pepperball is the first option in my correctional toolbox. One of the most dangerous times for officers is during cell extractions. Pepperball allows officers to respond with the lowest level of force and still be effective and ready if the situation escalates. The responding officer controls where the projectiles are aimed, how many projectiles are launched, and how rapidly they're deployed. This allows the response to be tailored to the moment. To learn more about Pepperball, go to www.pepperball.com or click the link below in the show's information guide. Pepperball is the safer option first. Well, hello and welcome back to the Prison Officer Podcast. My name's Mike Cantrell. Today I've got Dr. Jarrod Sadulski. He's a criminologist that focuses on the most pressing issues in criminal justice. Jarrod has over 2 decades of federal law enforcement experience, and for the past 5 years he's been leading teams to a prison in Central America. These teams provide the only training that the prison officers receive down there. In addition to that, he's been providing training on prison operations, involved in the various rehabilitation programs, and he's been working directly with the inmates to provide trade skills and training and life skills training. His experiences have led him to even testify before Congress this year, so I'm really excited to have him on the program. As most of you know, I've mentioned it before, one of the things I didn't know, or I knew, but just didn't realize how global corrections is until I started this podcast. We have listeners from 61 different countries. So when I had the opportunity to talk to Jarrod here and hear about what's, what he's seen down there in Central America, I just jumped on it. So welcome to the Prison Officer Podcast, Jarrod.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. I'd like to back up before we start and get into the prison stuff. Tell me a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, how you got into law enforcement, that type of stuff.
Sure. So I grew up in Southwest Florida, in Sarasota County, Florida. I joined the Coast Guard at 18. That gave me some exposure to law enforcement. So ultimately, I made that transition after my enlistment. And I did federal law enforcement as well as local law enforcement. And getting to the end of that career, I decided to continue in criminal justice. I pursued my PhD, became a criminologist. And the area that I study the most is human trafficking. So that's ultimately what led me to Central America to find the prison.
Right. And human trafficking and corrections often in many parts of the world go together. They're intertwined. The crime, excuse me about that. The crime, that a lot of the inmates, drug trafficking and stuff like that, those are interconnected. So that's interesting that you got involved in that. So did that just come out of the blue? How did you end up getting the chance to go to Central America?
Great question. So I was invited to come to to Belize in Central America, which is an English-speaking nation, the only English-speaking nation in Central America. And I was invited to go speak to their government on counter human trafficking and counter drug trafficking. So the event, was kind of turning into a big deal for me. It was right after I finished the PhD, and it was one of my first main speaking events. And the host, which is a university, invited all of these different people to come hear me speak, the Belize Coast Guard, Customs, Immigration. And just before the trip, I watched this Netflix documentary titled World's Toughest Prisons, the Belize edition. And it was about 2 days before the trip. And what I saw was just so unbelievable in that documentary that when I saw the prison director was on the list of people to hear me speak, I reached out and asked if I could get a tour of his prison. And not a request he gets very often, but he said, sure. And what I saw shocked me.
Wow. Well, so my next question is, tell me what you saw. Yeah, I mean, I've seen stuff from Central America where there's prisons down there that they don't feed and stuff like we do. If your family doesn't bring food to the gate, you don't get anything. Is it at that level, or tell me what you saw?
Right. So to put in perspective, so the prison, so I started doing some research after the documentary. The prison to Belize is south. So there's only one prison in the nation of Belize. So the
Okay.
prison to the south is Danley, Honduras. Now that prison is completely cartel run. So the staff and the prison officers maintain a perimeter around the prison, but it's actually the cartels that are controlling operations within the prison. In the prison to the north, until December of 2018, until the Mexican military had to come in, the prison to the north, which is Chetumal, Mexico, was in the same situation where the cartels were controlling the daily operations in the prison. Then you have Belize. So when I watched this documentary, like it was so unbelievable. So, and I saw what exists in the documentary. I saw firsthand. The first thing I saw when I pulled up to the prison gates were 25 inmates with machetes cutting down grass outside of the prison across the street with one guard that looked half asleep. And I'm watching this. And so then I go in, and this is a poor prison in a poor country.
Right.
And they receive $9 per day per inmate in operating costs. And yet they have one of the lowest reoffending rates in the world. And what I
Hmm.
learned was that the prison, and prior to the prison management being taken over by a faith-based Belizean nonprofit organization in 2002, the prison was in deplorable conditions. There was not running water in all of the facilities. They were housing adults with juveniles. They
Oh man.
they were they were constantly having escapes. Guards were bringing in drugs, sometimes firearms, and so it was so bad that a businessman was building the street in front of the prison, and he said, regardless of what they've done, nobody should live in that condition. He reached out to the prime minister about the deplorable conditions, and the prime minister said, "Well, if you're concerned, why don't you take over management of the prison?" So his name was John Woods, and what he did was he was a Rotarian in Belize. He went to the other Rotarians. They formed this Colby Foundation, which is after.
What's a Rotarian? I didn't.
Yep. So a Rotary. So it's basically the Rotary. Is a we have them in the United States and they're
Oh,
global.
Rotary
The
Club.
Rotary, right?
Okay. Okay.
And
Sorry.
no problem. So he went to his local Rotary, and they formed this Colby Foundation, which was named after a Catholic priest that sacrificed his life for somebody else in World War II in Germany. So they developed this program, and they come in and they said that if they're going to take over management of the prison, that it has to be done their way, which the government agreed to. First thing they did was they let go of all the staff and they brought new people in.
Hmm.
And then they started building out the prison to where the conditions improved. They separated the adults from the juveniles, and they ultimately the prison is on 220 acres of land, and so they're able to be self-sustaining in that they're able to farm. They have poultry, they have agriculture. So 60% of the food that's served at the prison is actually from the prison grounds, and so.
That's not unusual. I mean, many states, including Missouri, Tennessee, Mississippi, that's the way they used to take care of the prisons. The inmates made their own food, so
Right.
that's not unusual. It's a good program
So it shows
still.
this, right? So for me, I go in there and I was standing on the second floor, and I was with the director, and I was looking out over the yard, and there were a group playing soccer together. And he told me, the director told me, he said that's Bloods, Crips, and MS-13 on the streets. They kill each other. Here in the prison, they play soccer together. So I just was so amazed by what I had saw. And so we go, and now we're walking the grounds, and I've got inmates everywhere. They're walking around me, and I'd never been in a prison in my life. I knew nothing about prisons 5 years ago, and I was completely shocked at what I was seeing. And he explained that they have a it varies between 9 and 14% recidivism rate, which is one of the lowest that I'm aware of in the world. And yet they do that on receiving $9 per day per inmate for management of the prison, compared to last I checked, which is about 5 years ago. I think we were looking at like $100 per day per inmate, according to a study that I'd read in the United States. So here they are doing this with with only 10% of what prisons are receiving in the United States, and people aren't coming back. And so the first question I asked was, how? Why? So we go into um, a section of the prison that's a rehabilitation ward or area. And
Hmm.
I walk in there, there's 30 inmates in there. There's no prison officers. There's the director that's with me. There's a counselor that's in there. And I walk into this room, and you got a picture of Belize Central Prison. It is, it doesn't have the modern luxuries of a regular prison in a first world country. So, I'm looking around. The walls haven't been painted in years. It's concrete. The flooring is all just concrete, and it there's no air conditioning. I mean, it has electricity
Right.
in some parts of the prison it does, others it doesn't. And so I'm in there and I walk into this room and I'm looking and I'm surrounded by inmates. They kind of put me in the middle for some reason. And um the counselor said to the inmates, he said, we're going to have this counseling session. Do any of the inmates want to start this counseling session off in prayer? And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm in a third world prison in a third world country. What am I doing? And so this one inmate raises his hand. And so I don't know, am I supposed to close my eyes? I don't know what to do. So I'm
Hmm.
just kind of shocked standing there. And I listened to the prison inmate, which was in there convicted for murder. And during his prayer, he said, I want to ask for God's blessing on the visitor. And then it hit me. He's asking for God's blessing on me. Here I
Interesting.
am in this prison. And this inmate is asking for God's blessing on me. And the rest of the tour, I kept going back to that, and I came back to the United States, and I knew there was something I needed to do, and so I
Mm.
reached out to the director, and I said, "What do you need?" And he said, "Well, we need basic toiletries, we need basic supplies." And he explained to me the budget and the challenges they were having. So I rallied the troops, and we went and we filled up two shipping containers and had it sent to Belize, or sent items on
Wow.
two shipping containers to meet very basic needs. Cloth so that the inmates can sew to make their own uniforms. So we're not
Mm.
sending uniforms, we're sending cloth because that's the level that they're at. I still
Right.
was unsettled. And so I reached back out to the director and I said, "Well, is there anything else?" And he said, "Well, we don't receive any training. So when somebody is hired, they're put out in the yard. The only training they're receiving is from the prison officer standing next to them. There is absolutely no formal training or even a training manual or a training program within the prison at the time." And so
Interesting.
yep. So I thought, well, let me see if I can find somebody that's an expert in corrections, has some corrections experience that'll go down and provide training.
Right.
As hard as I looked, I couldn't find anybody. I mean, people would go, but they want 5 or 10 grand. I don't blame them, but I'm asking them to go and even pay their own expenses.
Right.
And so I couldn't find anybody, and I was still unsettled. So I decided that I can't let this go. So what I did was I started going into corrections facilities here in my home state of Florida. And I explained to the prison wardens and everybody that would listen to me, hey, I just need to learn, and then I'll go down and deliver this training. So
Hmm.
the first training that they had asked for was riots, escapes, and hostage-taking situations, which are realities in any prison, right?
Sure.
So that was what I focused on. I went to three different corrections facilities, prisons here in Florida. I got manuals. I talked to their tactical teams. I talked to basically some of the facilities would really open up and give me
Mm.
everything that I needed and basically let me sit in on their training so that I
Mm.
could go and replicate that training.
Sure.
So I went down there in January of 2020, was at this point when I provided the first training on riots, escapes, and hostage taking situations. COVID hit. Some problems in the prison, right? They were no
Right.
longer allowed to see their family members. They were on lockdown for months.
Hmm.
And
Sure.
that resulted in the largest prison
Hmm.
escape, riot, and hostage taking situation. And so I think it was 18 or 28 inmates that escaped. They had taken one of the prison officers, grabbed her by her hair, dragged her into a cell, threatening to sexually assault her. They held several of the inmate, I'm sorry, several of the guards in the cells,
Mm.
having them call out, whenever the radio calls would come, to report that everything was normal. They waited for nightfall and they escaped. Now, as terrible as all that is, and I'm not crediting the training, but I will say not one prison officer died.
Right.
And that was the
Yeah.
focus of the training, the
Sure.
survival. And so the last escape was that particular one. So they have not had an escape now in 4 years,
Right.
which, for having no budget, and the fence was blown down after a hurricane in 2023, and yet they've had no escapes. So,
Wow.
that was a very isolated incident.
Yeah.
And, but it really motivated me. So through COVID, all the way to today, in fact, I'll be there next week. I have been taking teams now that, this has kind of gained some attention. I've been able to find people that are willing to go.
Hmm.
And we've been providing training now for several years. Corrections One Academy, I reached out to those folks and explained to them what I'm doing. And I said, they've never had anything close to an online training academy. Is this something that you would partner with me on? And they did. They gave me a
Nice.
deal, and we ended up graduating, the vast majority of their staff.
Wow.
And that's
So
the first time they've received formalized training.
that's great. That's amazing. So for those of us that, haven't been there, let's back up a little bit. Describe the prison to me, because I've got a bunch of correctional officers I know, like myself, that are sitting there trying to imagine what this looks like. So are there bars and cells? Are they double bunked, triple bunked? Are you talking tiers, multiple tiers? Do they have pods? Is it bays? That type of stuff. Describe that prison to me.
Okay, so when you walk in, there's the control center, and they're basically all the inmates come through there, and so from there they hit the first checkpoint where they're searched, and then as you walk into the prison setting, to the left is a large auditorium, and there's probably about 9 different cell buildings. And so
Okay.
when you walk into the main door, which is, I think they call it a rickets. Does that sound right? That's what they call it down there.
Okay.
So basically, like the bars of the doors, like
Mm-hmm.
like what I would typically expect to see in a prison. So they have that. It's rusted,
Mm-hmm.
it's unpainted, and you walk in, concrete floors, concrete walls, and you walk in, and there's probably 30. There's 2 wings, and there's probably maybe the prison houses. The current population's 1,100, but I think it's built for like 2,000 or something. So it's one of
Okay.
the few prisons I've heard of that is not overcrowded. So a lot of these wings are not actually even occupied. I shouldn't say a lot. Some of them are not. So looking into the cell, what you would see is all concrete. The walls, the flooring, they do have, it is double bunked, and
Okay.
and then in places that it's not, which would be the what they call it their administrative segregation. So the people that break the prison rules,
Right.
they are sent to total deprivation, is what I would call it. There's no electricity, there's no beds. If you don't want to lay on the ground, you could tie a sheet to the metal bar, the door, to the window, because the window's metal bars.
Right.
And and that's what it is. And as harsh as that sounds, that's a much better condition than being in the prisons in the neighboring countries. If you go
Right.
to a prison in Guatemala, a prison in El Salvador would be the exception. But if you look at Honduras, for example, these are
Mm-hmm.
luxuries. ADSEG in Belize is a luxury compared to these other prisons, to where at least they're safe, right? We don't
Yeah.
have at the Belize Central Prison. You're not having violence among inmates. Even though the conditions are rough because it's a poor country,
Yeah.
the people are fed. The people, all of these standards, and they go by, I think, the UN standards. They're all met. They, are recognized as a prison that is operating without any meaningful budget in a powerful way and doing amazing things. And so what we've been doing the last couple of years is trying to, help improve the conditions the best that we can at the prison, right?
Right.
So if I can take people down there that, have construction skills, that have different skills that we can help, strengthen the conditions in the prison, we're all for it. Now, I will say that, in the programs, so if we go back to that rehabilitation program, so it's called Ashcroft Rehabilitation Program, and
Mm-hmm.
it basically, I want to say 90-day program. And, they're receiving counseling every day, and they're staying together. So the same room that they are doing the training in during the day is the same room they're sleeping in. So, and it's just basically a big bay.
Okay.
And, in that, they have single beds, and, it's, on the outside, it looks like a prison in a third world country, but these guys, they're happy to be in these programs because they're
Yeah.
receiving life skills training, they're receiving training on trade skills and what to do when they get out. And I could give you story after story of people that I've come across in that community that, as soon as I tell them that I'm down there because I'm providing training at the prison, oh, I was in the prison, X amount of years ago. And I always say, well, what do you think of the prison? And every single person that I've spoken to that was sentenced in that prison speaks highly of it. They say that, it changed my life. It straightened me out. It got me off drugs. And I mean, everybody from the taxi driver to the tour guide, Yeah, it seems like everybody has been to that prison. It seems
Yeah,
like, I mean, it's not true. Like, not everybody hasn't been there, but it's amazing to me how many people I come across that haven't gone back.
yeah. So talk to me about the prison officers.
Mm,
I know when I've seen, prisons in some other countries, sometimes there's a really high female
mhm.
uh, ratio to the male inmates. Even with when I was down on the border, I saw a prison that was a male institution. It was almost entirely female officers. So is it that way? What's the officer carrying? Or do they have
Mhm.
cuffs? Do they have a baton? Do they have OC?
Great,
Tell me about what the officer's day is like.
great question. So I spend a lot of time with them, and I've gotten to know them, and it, it really, I mean, I can't think of a better word than inspires me. So this
Okay.
prison, they have a lot of things in place to maintain these standards, right? So drug testing, they're always drug testing both the staff and the inmates. Recently, they did a sweep where they had the police come in with dogs. They pulled every inmate out of the cells, put them in the main auditorium, had the dogs go through every cell. There was no, and I'm sorry, I'm not answering your question, but I'll get to it.
No,
So
you're fine.
they put basically they did a surprise search,
Sure.
and they brought in the dogs. Went all through the prison. It was like midnight, 2 in the morning. So nobody would have seen this coming, and they did not find any drugs in that prison. I'm not saying the drugs don't exist in that prison because they do, and, there's a couple incidents a year because I read the annual reports, of where they are finding people, where they are popping positive on a drug test. But for
Sure.
those dogs to go through those cells and not to have found drugs or weapons, they also searched obviously for weapons and that. And, with 1,000 inmates and basically being able to go through there and not finding any major prison violations really speaks volumes to how this prison is operated.
Hmm.
But to answer your question, so these guys are hungry for training. They, if there's a period of time where I don't go, because I try to go once a quarter, and
Hmm.
if there's time that, I'm getting 6, 7 months there, I'm hearing from them. They're
Yeah.
contacting me on the phone, they're asking for training. And, it is inspiring to me that a prison officer that is, being paid, last I checked, which is probably about a year ago, $2.50 an hour starting off, yet
Wow.
maintains his integrity, you
Hmm.
know, maintains, basically follows the procedures that are in place. And this prison operates in such a good manner that
Hmm.
I, as an American, walk freely through every aspect of that prison by myself. And had I tried that before 2002, I would be taken as a bargaining chip, against the government. Here, when I'm there next week, I will walk through, the different sections of the prison and not think twice about it. And in Central America, that's unheard of.
I wouldn't recommend you do it in a penitentiary in America.
Wow. Yeah.
So, um, yeah, people have to go through training before they're even thought about, and most of them are
Mm.
going to be escorted through our prisons with an officer. So, yeah, that says something about just I don't know. Is the integrity, the willingness to help because they're all kind of in the same uh, low income system?
Right. So part of it is the size of the country, right? So the size of the country has a population of around 400,000 people, which is a
Oh wow.
small country, the entire country. So the landmass of New Jersey, population of 400,000 people. So, it's everybody kind of knows everybody. And, I think that that's part of it. And I think that there's, it's a very much a Catholic nation. And so,
Mm,
I think that's a big part of it. And, but these prison officers, like I watch them. I watch them seeing if they're thoroughly searching the inmates. The supervisors are around, but if I'm standing there, I would think that whatever they normally do in their daily practice, they'll do with me around.
mm,
And I'm seeing them go through the steps. I'm seeing them hungry for training. But to answer your question in terms of equipment, so the average prison officer would only have a uniform. The QRT, quick response team, they're going to have pepper spray and handcuffs. Now, the inmates obviously are handcuffed, if they're taken back and forth to court. There's a special group, that would have handcuffs for that. So, and you had mentioned OC, QRT, they're the only people with OC. So, but what I learned was
hmm
they didn't do any training with it. So so for the last couple of years, every time I'm down, any new officer that didn't previously go through my OC training goes through it. Every one of them gets sprayed, and then I make them, fight, through it for a couple minutes,
Sure.
and then we'll light up a whole cell. with pepper spray, and we'll have somebody, because if you saw what a lack of equipment was there, like in the United States, we might use a 150-pound dummy that was given to it or that we paid for. There, that's not going to happen. There, it's going to be one of the other prison officers that's role playing and is laying there, and these guys got to go in there, through the thick pepper spray and evacuate them out. And so
Yeah.
that's part of the training that we do. It's to see these guys get so excited over this training, especially when we were doing the corrections online training. But it just it shows that the pride they take in their job. Now they're because it is low paying, we do lose a lot. So when we do the training, a lot of them go to the military or the police because they now have a training certificate. And
So you mentioned law enforcement. You mentioned them earlier. Are they better funded down there? And why is corrections? No,
no,
they're kind of in the same boat.
they're making maybe a dollar or two more an hour.
Okay.
They're not doing not making much. And then the other thing is transportation, right? So even the prison officers, they'll be on a shift for it's a pretty long time. I think it's like a week. There's barracks, but then when it's time to
Mhm.
go home, they nobody you are considered rich if you have a vehicle in Belize. So I can think of maybe six, and they're all part of management that have vehicles. So
Wow.
the other staff of 250 people, because there's 250 staff members, are basically going on the bus, the bus system to get home, which their home could be 4 hours from the prison because it could be completely on the opposite side of the country, which is all jungle roads. So it's amazing to me, and not to say that there's not problems. There are problems. There's problems in every prison, but the level of problems and the type of problems they're having are not to the level that I've read about in other prisons, not just in Central America, but around the world.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
it's very much, and one thing I like about it is there's there's no political correctness in this prison. There's no things just work down there differently, right? So punishment is strict. I mean, they call it tough love. I wouldn't
Yeah.
want tough love from that prison. So I've seen what those ad sig cells look like, but you know what? It acts as a deterrent,
Yeah.
and the steps are in place to maintain that integrity, and there's zero tolerance for lack of integrity or policy violations. And for these officers, they want this job
Yeah.
because it's very difficult to get work in Belize.
So is part of the reason this works the supervision? Do you get to talk to supervisors? Do you get to train them in any type of leadership? Is that even a factor?
Right. Great question. So the leadership is really the backbone of that prison. So, I speak with them almost, at least the prison director, almost on a daily basis. I spoke with them yesterday. I haven't spoken today. But I advocate, for the prison. I speak on their local or their national news, to advocate for, the prison about how people need to hire these convicted inmates when they get out. If they don't have, and we all know this, but if there's no opportunity for them, they're going to go back into dealing drugs, doing whatever it takes to feed their family. The level of poverty is not well understood in that area, I don't think. I know I
Mm,
didn't understand it. So, so about 2 years ago, I said, okay, well, I went to the inmates and I talked to probably maybe a couple hundred and over a week. And I said to them, I said, okay, well, so everybody at the prison, because I've been doing this a while, the inmates all know me. And I've
mhm,
been told, because in Belize, Belize has most of the inmates are gang members, right?
mhm,
So when I go out in this, so before I started going into the street, I went to some of these higher level gang guys,
mhm.
and I talked to them. I said, I'm willing to go into your community because your family, your children, your mother, your dad, they're living in, I don't know how to describe it. I mean, shacks that don't have roofs. And I
Yeah.
said, I'm willing to go, and basically, especially the children, try to implement some mentorship programs, implement some different things to keep your children from following your steps. Tell
Yeah.
me what that looks like. And so I've kind of opened up that dialogue. And then what I did was I went and I met with the prime minister and I met with the minister of home affairs and others. And I
Mhm.
basically outlined what the prison officers, I'm sorry, the prison inmates are saying that led them to prison in their country. And, we're still in the process of implementing different change, but I can tell you that I was told that the gang members on the street will take a bullet for me before they let anything happen to me because they know of the work that I'm doing. And
Yeah.
that's because the orders are coming from are coming from the gang members that are incarcerated.
Sure. I
And
was really interested in the fact that you mentioned there were Crips down there and MS-13. Of course, MS-13 is for us up here. That's more of a Mexican gang. I don't know if it's all South America or not, but
yep.
some of those are considered American gangs.
Well, here's how that happened. So in the 80s and 90s, when uh, people from Belize were locked up in Los Angeles and locked up in American prisons, they learned gang life from their prison gangs. Then they took that
Uh,
with them back to Belize, and unfortunately, the streets of Belize, the safest place in Belize, I always tell people, the safest place in Belize, other than the tourist areas, is the prison. It
hmm,
truly is. It
yeah.
truly is, and it's because of how well that prison's run. So as far as the management, the prison director he's been at the prison since 2002, since the takeover of
Hmm.
2002, right? He started, I think he was an accountant, worked his way up. Now he's the director. Technically, they called it the CEO of the prison there. And so he's been with that program, that Colby program that, is based on reintegration into society, is faith-based. And so he's been a part of it from the very beginning. And he,
Hmm.
along with his management staff, really are the backbone. And because they are so strict is the right word, but they maintain such standards that their policy violations, whether the staff or inmates, are going to be dealt with very, very seriously. It's to the point that people, they just don't mess around with it.
Well, and I mean, I can absolutely get behind thoughts like that. What we deal with in prison, there's not black and white. I mean, there's not gray. It's black and white. People get hurt if we don't do our jobs.
Right.
Inmates get hurt if they aren't doing what they're supposed to. So I can understand that. So what kind of support, or if any, are you getting? I know you've brought stuff from America there. You say it's a large Catholic country.
Mhm.
Does the Catholic Church get involved in bringing anything in to help these guys, to mentor or ministry to them?
There has been a lot of people, that have come
Okay.
from both the church and that have come from the community that will come in and provide these life skills training, or I'm sorry, life skills training too, but also job skills training. So a
Yeah.
lot of people have done that, and I don't know how many from the United States, but locally, I see a lot of people in there providing training. And I articulate when I go and I speak for the news about the prison, I explain to them that, to keep these people from going through your bedroom window, breaking into your house, stealing so that they can eat, we can provide a certificate that says, hey, they've been trained, they've received, certificates for, accomplishments with anger management, whatever the issues are that brought them to prison.
Hmm.
We're able to provide certificates that articulate, maybe it's plumbing, electrical, whatever job they were able to do in the prison
Sure.
or learn, we're advocating for them, for the community to hire them. And some are. And we also really push the inmates to get into self-employment. Now,
Right.
self-employment there looks like farming, looks like
Uh,
woodworking and selling your souvenirs, um, your
sure.
wood products to souvenir
Yeah.
stores. So that's what self-employment means down there. But it works. It works.
Yeah. So I noticed that we spoke just a tiny bit about this, that you got to testify in front of Congress. So what were you testifying about there? Was that the human trafficking, or was it the prison?
Great question. So now, at this stage, this was probably 2023. So now I was going there at least quarterly, typically monthly.
Hmm.
We were also, this is when we were doing the Corrections One Academy training. So I kept going down there to attend their graduations and hand out the diplomas. And somebody had reached out and asked, he said that he was a former gang member in Los Angeles
Hmm.
and he went to prison for murder. He was a pretty prominent gang member, went to prison in California for murder, then was deported back to his home country in Belize. And he asked if he could come in and speak to the current gang members. Not wild about the idea, but I figured we'll give him a shot. So
Okay.
brought him in, and he spoke to about 500 gang members about his life and articulating how, basically advocating for getting out of gang life was his message. And so, but afterwards, I talked to him and I said, what can you tell me? Because the guy's been rehabilitated. The guy is, he did his time, did 27 years in prison, and before getting paroled. And so I said, what can you tell me that I don't know about gangs, about all of it? And so he opened up in a way that no one else ever has to me. And in particular, he talked about human trafficking. And so that was already an area that I've really been working hard on. So I wrote an article the article's titled, I'd have to pull up the exact title, but something to the effect of, um, human trafficking from a gang member's perspective.
Right.
And so I published this article. Well, I get an email from the U.S. Congressional Committee on Homeland Security, and they said they needed to speak with me, and I thought I was in trouble. And I've had bad run-ins with the embassy in the U.S. embassy in Belize before, so I figured that there was some other issue I got to deal with, and so I really did think I was in trouble. And so they said that the staff director, wanted to meet with me, and so we did a Zoom call, and she was reading my article out, and she's like, "We haven't heard any of this. Where are you getting this from?" And I
Interesting.
explained, well, he is not at the prison, but I met him because he came into the prison to speak. And she said, "Would you be willing to testify before Congress about what you've learned?" And I said, "Absolutely." Because see, he was a sex trafficker. He was an enforcer in a sex
Hmm.
trafficking house involving people that are coming through the border. And so like his information was so detailed. He was just describing to me, what the sex trafficking houses look like, what organ harvesting looks like. I mean, he has seen it. Like he's seen it
Wow.
all firsthand. And so, ironically, him and I, we also stay in close communication. And he's not
Hmm.
affiliated with the prison. He's just a citizen down there. But he, really still is a wealth of knowledge. And so,
Sure.
I'll take when I have teams that go down there, like I had a retired FBI agent that came to provide training at the prison. He was dying to talk to him and sit down and just talk to him about these different crazy things. So it's an interesting world that only I think prison officers would understand in terms of these people are still like the public doesn't understand. They don't understand that if somebody goes to prison for murder, that they're a soulless, lifeless body that's just in the cell. But these people, I've seen it. They can be rehabilitated. They can, and my faith is very important to me, so I look at it from a Christian perspective. But
Hmm.
I've seen a redemption in people that were at the time the worst of the worst, which he was probably one of the worst people that I've ever talked to at the time. I
Right.
mean, he murdered the guy he was buying drugs from because he didn't want to pay him. That's how he ended up in prison.
Yeah. Yeah. It's there's no way, and I try with this podcast to explain a little bit to the public, but until you actually see, there's an entire world in there that has different morals, that has different ways of looking at things, and it's shocking. And especially, I mean, I came from a little country town when I got hired into corrections, and even in America, it was a huge culture shock. So I can't imagine seeing some of that. They just don't have choices because of the how poor they are down there, right?
To explain how bad it is growing up. The so the gangs on the streets, especially in Belize, Southside Belize City. So if you are a child not affiliated with gangs, but you're a
Mm-hmm.
12-year-old child and you live on a particular block, you are not permitted to go on to the next block over if it is controlled by a rival gang. If you do, it's murder. There's no second chance. And then now all of a sudden we start having the clashes. And so
Mm-hmm.
now the gangs are all shooting up each other's houses. What's interesting down there, which I wish at times I wish we could do this, is the gang violence will rise, so they'll have a state of emergency. Anyone that's ever been registered as a gang member,
Mm-hmm.
automatic, they get picked up, they're put into prison. They start off, I think it's 60 days. And then if there's continued to be gang violence, they'll tack on another 60 days. I know there's some defense attorneys that might argue due
Interesting.
process with that thing, but I've seen it, and it's what's amazing to me is there'll be times that it's too dangerous for me to go into the poorest parts of the Belize City and do the food drives that I do, and it's then I know a state of emergency is coming, and I'll actually wait for it to happen. They'll scoop up all the gang members, put them in prison. I'll go down to the food drive, then I'll go provide training at the prison, and I'm looking around, and it's just as peaceful here as it always is. Because at the
Uh,
prison, they're not playing around. These guys
yeah,
can kill each other on the street, but in the prison, they're going to obey the rules or pay the consequence.
the government's almost taking the gangs hostage,
Right.
aren't they?
Yep. And so it's yeah, it's. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
You
okay
keep
with it.
messing up, we'll keep
Yeah.
tacking time on. You'll
Right.
never get them back.
Right.
Wow.
Well, in El Salvador, they do that. So El Salvador, President Bukele, he came in, built these mega prisons,
Hmm.
and went. And if somebody was MS-13, they're in there. Whether they committed a crime at the time or not, they're in prison.
Yeah.
And he's getting a lot of heat for that now, but because they've been in there a while. But it works in Central America. That's what you do.
Unfortunately. So, and this is going to back up to something you said early in the podcast, but I've always heard the term cartel ran prison. Talk to me about what that means, because for me, I mean, I just have no concept of
Mm-hmm.
this prison that's being ran by, I guess, the gangs,
Right.
and the officers are all outside.
Right. So fortunately in Belize we don't have cartels, we have gangs, but any cartel activity is not, it's nothing compared to the scope of other countries. And I do a lot of work with the human trafficking stuff involving cartels. So I spend a lot of
Right.
time on the border, a lot of time in Mexico, and so I am pretty well versed with the cartel world. And in terms of when they have the prison, there's actually a Netflix documentary. It's that same documentary, World's Toughest Prisons. If you watch the Danley Honduras video, it'll show you what that looks like. And
Okay.
so, yep. So it basically, it's the prison officers. They maintain the perimeter. But it's truly the cartel leaders that are maintaining order within the prison, and that exists in different countries throughout, Central America. It's insane. But if you think about how much power the cartels have.
Mm,
And, I see it all the time in Mexico where I'll see the cartels moving drugs or moving people, and the Mexican military, which is a bunch of kids, 18 to 22-year-old kids, are just standing there. Yeah, I mean, I have
yeah.
drone footage of the Mexican military, well, Mexican military law enforcement, along with the cartels, working together. And we have drone footage of it. So, these
Yeah.
guys in a country that's controlled by cartels, fortunately, like I said, Belize doesn't have a cartel problem, but, in countries that they're really controlled by these gangs or
Hmm.
cartels, Northern Triangle, which is El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. El
Okay.
Salvador's the current exception, but Guatemala and Honduras, 95% of crime goes unpunished. So,
Mm,
the people that are in there are the worst of the worst,
right.
and they have much more control than certainly the prison officers, but really in some cases, in some areas, the government. They
Yeah.
to stay alive, politicians are accepting the bribes of these cartel guys.
Hmm. So in Belize, how's the sentencing?
Hmm.
Is there death penalty? Is life mean you're never coming out and hope's gone? Are they handing out 40, 50, 60-year sentences, or is there hope?
Yep. So fair question. So what's different down there about here is that you can easily be in prison for 3, 4, 5 years, maybe more, before your case ever goes to court. So they're on remand,
Wow.
and that happens I would say, well, somewhere around 40% of the inmates are there on remand. And so there's the court system was based on the old English system because they were British Honduras is what the old name of Belize used to be. So
Mm,
their court system still follows this English process, and
right.
it's very antiquated. If you get bail, um, if you get bail, most people in Belize aren't going to be able to pay it. So when
Hmm.
COVID was a thing, if people weren't wearing a mask and they were given $100 fine and they couldn't pay it, they were sitting in the prison for months. And then
Sure.
sometimes the prison director would advocate for them to be released. And so the court system is not. I speak highly of the prison, but the court system, like it's really a mess. It's a mess. And so for these guys and I've talked to that have been there for years, I definitely encourage you to watch the prison, the Belize edition of the
Yeah.
World's Toughest Prisons.
I'll
And
look that up and we'll put it in the show notes.
okay,
So,
perfect. Yep,
yeah.
and and exactly what I saw is in that documentary. And so, what's interesting is the documentary was done by Raphael Rowe, which is an atheist, but he says
Hmm.
right at the end of the show, that he can't argue with what he's seeing, and it's working. And so, but as far as being on remand, that's very common down there. And then,
Wow.
for the prison, the prison inmates. once they go through that ARC, that Ashcroft Rehabilitation Program, then they're given, basically they're a trustee. So now they're given a job. So they know that any violation is going to basically cause them to lose that job, and they're going back into total isolation. So, they're very careful. And I think that's part of why
Hmm.
I'm able to walk freely around the prison is the stakes are so high for them to lose their freedom. So,
Yeah.
when I walk around the prison, there's 50, 100 trustees doing everything, mowing grass to doing all the prison stuff. And, I walk up to them and there's never even been close to an issue. And in fact, my partner, my business partner, she's a Hispanic female,
Hmm.
little like 5'5", 5'2", and she will walk shoulder to shoulder with me throughout this prison, just her and I.
Yeah. Wow.
Is it? Yeah.
So one of the big
And be
things,
safe.
right? Right. So one of the big things with rehabilitation, of course, that I've seen American system is family contact. So I'm guessing they don't have phones
No,
inside the prison to call family, and family may not have phones. Do they get visiting?
they
Do
do.
they just do it through letters or?
Nope, it's actually a very generous visiting policy. So they have visitors nonstop, and
Hmm.
it's interesting because the visitors have to go through the same search procedures as the inmates, and then they're put into a chain link room. And they have so basically there's like plexiglass, and they're able to communicate through a hole in the plexiglass, but they're basically in a concrete on the floor, like a concrete bench, and then able to communicate with their loved ones there. But yeah, that's very common. You had asked about the death penalty. So Belize, part of the deal whenever Colby Foundation took over in 2002, they said they didn't want to do the death penalty, and that was one of the concessions the government made.
Okay. Okay. So I guess where are you going from here? What is it that you're looking to? I'm sure you're wanting to help more down there. What is it you're looking to do in the future?
Great question. The need for training never ends.
Hmm.
So, what I'm hoping is to bring additional people that want to see this, that want to contribute, that want to get involved. I
Hmm.
encourage them to fact check me, go and do all the research online, maybe reach out to the prison director. And, I've taken teams now, it's been going on 5 years now that I've taken teams. I have not taken one person down there that did not say that it changed it. Every single person I took down there said it changes their lives. To
I'm
see
sure.
people just with so much pride, but with so little, and but still to be working hard, to be so eager and hungry for training, it's encouraging.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I don't see it at that level, but I do training around the country. And when you go to the small jails that don't, I worked at the Federal Bureau of Prisons, ton of
Mm.
money, ton of training, but you go out here to some little county where they got small jails and those people are, I mean, they're just focused on you. They're just soaking up whatever you can give them. So I'm sure it's like that,
Mm.
only 1,000 times more to have those people down there.
Yeah.
Um,
And also the inmates, sitting and talking to these inmates, it's not. It's not common for an American to be going in there and investing time into them by talking to them. And the training that I provide them, anger management, how to be a father when you're incarcerated, and it resonates with them because they're not receiving it otherwise. So
right.
that's part of I think why I have the safety that I do down there is these guys, these higher ranking gang members are the ones that I'm providing the training to. So the word gets out then, to leave me alone. And speaking of the guy who was a former gang member that went to prison in California, he's told me repeatedly, and he's on the streets, he knows
Hmm.
that he goes, they know who you are, but there's an order not to mess with you.
Wow. That's amazing. That's just amazing what you've seen. Um, so what's the next? So is this part of an organization? Is this just you?
It's just me,
Just you? Just you.
just
Okay.
me.
So
So,
do you make phone calls and say, hey, they need this? Or how do people help? I guess
great.
is the next question.
Great question. So, there are always needs, with every need you can imagine the person could have, they have it. So,
Hmm.
it's, there's really not like, I don't, try to fundraise for the prison.
Right.
What I do is I try to find a specific need that they have at the time. Right. So at one point, the prison director, reached out and said, we don't have the budget for prison officer uniforms. So,
Hmm.
he was concerned because he's putting the new officers out there on the yard with inmates that some of which don't have uniforms.
Hmm.
So, that are in civilian clothes that they showed up to the prison with. So that is always one need,
Yeah.
is the cloth for them to sew to create their own uniforms. So what I would say is anybody that is interested in getting involved in either maybe, going down there and seeing it firsthand, or at
Hmm.
least having a discussion about what could be done to support this prison is welcome to reach out to me. I do have a company. It's not affiliated with the prison, but I do
Okay.
human trafficking consulting. And so my website is my last name. So it's www.sadulski, sadulski.com. And anyone can reach out to me from there, and we can get on the phone with the prison director and talk about the specific needs of the day.
Interesting. Wow, that's just fascinating. Just, I
It
mean,
is.
I can't even picture it, and I've been 30 years in corrections and I can't even picture some of the stuff that you're telling me.
So if we can put in the notes, so I've written a lot of articles and I've taken a
Sure.
lot of pictures, and so we can include those in the notes because it'll walk through really the years of this work, and it'll
Hmm.
include the pictures of how the prison was and how the prison is today.
Yeah. No, we can absolutely do that, and along with your contact information,
Great.
and I'll look up the websites for these videos here so that people can get an idea and watch those documentaries.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Just amazing. Anything else you want to tell us?
Nope. I just want to thank the corrections officers that are listening. It's sometimes the forgotten pillar of the criminal
Mhm.
justice system, but it is certainly equally as important, and it's an honorable profession, and you guys certainly have my support.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate everything you're doing down there for them because I have brothers around the world. We're still brothers and sisters. We all do the same job in some form. Some of them don't have as much. Some of them have more. So thank you for being on here.
Absolutely.
Well,
Thanks for the opportunity.
let's check back in a year and see what's changed down there, and you can talk some more about it.
That'd be great.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
I would like to take a minute to thank one of our sponsors that make the Prison Officer Podcast possible. Omni RTLS is a company that I've been working with for the last year. I am proud to be part of this team of correctional professionals who have developed the best real-time locating system on the market today. With Omni's real-time location technology, you automatically know the accurate locations and interactions of all inmates, staff, and assets anywhere in your correctional facility, and you have this information in real time. Omni is cutting-edge software for today's jails and prisons. It is the only way to monitor every square inch of your facility while still being PREA compliant. Go to www.omnirtls for more information and to make your facility safer today. That's www.omnirtls.com. If you enjoy these podcasts, the best way to support the Prisoner Officer Podcast is to share these episodes with your friends or family on social media. Let me invite you to visit www.theprisonofficer.com. If you haven't already, check out the Prison Officer Podcast on Facebook and click that little follow button. Or leave us a message, or better yet, leave us a review. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcast, Google, or Spotify, please click the subscribe button. Till next time, I'm Mike Cantrell. Watch your back, and please take care of each other out there behind those walls.